everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to have a look at the two Korean teams that are going to be going to Masters Berlin. Unlike Reykjavik, where they just had Newturn representing the region, this time it's going to be Vision Strikers and F4Q who are going. The background of these two teams is quite different, as Vision Strikers really represent the elite class of the early Korean Valorant pedigree, and prior to their loss to F4Q in stage 2 of VCT, they had a 100+ game win streak. In fact, they were so dominant that their loss to Newturn in the stage 2 VCT playoff semi-finals was one of the most talked about upsets in all of Valorant. As for F4Q, this is essentially a team composed of streamers and content creators who decided that they wanted to take the competitive side of this game a little bit more seriously. And they have people like Bunny and Zumba on the team who have very serious competitive experience. Both of them played for the Seoul Dynasty back in the Overwatch League, so it's not like these players don't have competitive experience. And in recent times, they've made some roster changes, such as bringing in Esperanza from Rio Company, previously on Team 1, as well as Coach Locomotive, who came from the same team. Both of these teams played together in the grand finals here in Stage 3, obviously, and other than on split, F4Q got a little bit schooled by Vision Strikers. And I think some of the reasons why are perhaps going to cause a bit of a roadblock for F4Q when it comes to Masters Berlin. That doesn't mean that Vision Strikers are perfect, and it also doesn't mean these two teams don't have their pros either. So let's have a talk about some of the facets of the way these two teams play and how they could hurt or benefit them going into Masters Berlin. One of the issues I foresee with these two teams is agent selections. Particularly for F4Q, they are very rigid with the kind of agents they like to play. 5k is always Reyna, Bunny is always Raze, Zumba is always Astra, for example. And I think that it means that oftentimes they have pretty important components missing from their lineups that can prove a huge detriment in the games that they play. For example, on Icebox, F4Q didn't bring a Viper or a Sage, so there was no wall, and you're relying solely on things like Astra Stars to support a plant. When you're looking at something like a B-site plan, in my opinion, that's just totally unviable, and you are making life unnecessarily hard for yourself. Both teams also ran into the issue of running minimal flashes. On the side of Vision Strikers, they haven't run any flashes on Icebox since Stage 1 Masters. And for F4Q, the only flash they brought was the Reyna Leer. And even then, the way that they played it was either in non-initiating positions or it was played too passively off of. The flash issue did get a little bit better for Vision Strikers going forward in this series as they played some more Breach and some more Sky, especially bringing in their 6th player Lakia, who basically specializes in Sky, which meant that they had some really valuable flashes that they could use on Bind. Compare that to F4Q on Bind, who put 5k on Sky. This is someone who I already said almost exclusively plays Reyna, so you're gonna naturally expect them to be less efficient with that utility. And you could even tell actually by their defensive setups. You know, for example, I'm a big fan of the Sky Garden positioning. It gives you really good control over B long, you can flash down it, you can send Trailblazers down it if you want, but the way that F4Q would have 5k positioned is over in U-Hall. Meanwhile, they would have their Viper on Garden. Now, in my opinion, you're going to get way less value out of the utility you have available to you with a positioning like that compared to if you have your Sky playing in Garden, which is what Vision Strikers would do. Vision Strikers actually have really good post-plant setups, but they almost never involve a ton of utility. So things like Viper's Pits, Hunter's Furies, Lockdown, I don't think they're quite as abundant as you would see in other regions. Almost all of their value on their post-plant setups comes from their positioning. So things like setting up crossfires, having good trade potential. They're also very effective at retaking space on a site as well. F4Q definitely looked a little less strong on their post plants. On Icebox, a lot of this was because they used that initiating utility early, but then they didn't have a ton of late round utility because they didn't bring things like walls. So the ability to cut off line of sight, for example, wasn't quite as there as it was for Vision Strikers. And keep in mind as well, this would be going up against various walls that were available to Vision Strikers, as well as a lot of mollies, because they would be running a Killjoy and a Viper. So the ability to move around for F4Q as well as get line of sight was significantly mitigated. You compare that to the way that they were playing on Bind, where a lot of their issues with post-plant positioning actually came from the way they were stacking up and not necessarily using the space on the site to its fullest potential. So you're not having good crossfire setups, you're not necessarily in ideal positions to get trades, you're all kind of bunched up, which often meant that they could be victims to trades from Vision Strikers or even multi-kills. Both of these teams actually have really responsive rotates. You see a lot of moving and repositioning on both the attack and the defense, and I actually quite like that fluidity, and it feels far less rigid to, for example, what we have in EU. That said, I felt like F4Q could oftentimes find themselves prone to being baited into making these large defensive rotations and then end up leaving one site open. The best map where they had the most control over this was definitely Ascent, where even when they would make big defensive rotations, they would oftentimes leave someone on the other side, which made it much harder for Vision Strikers to pull off a successful fake. There are a couple of examples of default positioning that I think differ from other regions' habits, but a really big one that stands out to me is the way that mid is held and split, because these teams do not like to hold vents. You are not likely to see someone holding vents. In other regions, it's very common to see someone specifically situated there for the purposes of holding mid or forcing a clear, but here in Korea, it just doesn't happen that often. I think when you consider Sky in EMEA or KO in NA, who are oftentimes used to, help attack this area, these agents aren't going to need to use their utility to clear vents, which is going to mean that their mid to late round pushes are much stronger going against the Korean teams because they'll have that utility available. Meanwhile, the Korean teams, who maybe aren't quite so used to the mid-map warfare that we see in some of the Western regions, they may find space being taken from them much easier. And if you consider the attacking preferences of a team like F4Q, who typically don't really go for garage pushes early, they much prefer to come up through mid, they might find that engagement to be much tougher going against international teams than they do going against Korean teams. I'm very interested to see how other regions are going to deal with the opportunism of the Korean duelists. I think they'll match the NA playstyle a little bit more, where they don't skip a beat and they're totally happy to push through cosmic divides and whatnot. But against the EMEA duelists, I actually think there's going to be a lot more of a difference. And I'm primarily thinking of, Bunny and Buzz here, from early round openers to surprise the opponent, to the late rounds where everything's stacked against you. They're both really happy to make these fast, surprising engages to take the opponent back, and they use their utility really well as well to facilitate these kind of plays. Bunny is great with the satchels for mobility, and he's the king of the judge. And then Buzz uses a really good combination of the tailwinds and the updraft to ensure impunity when he's getting away from these aggressive engagements, whether it's because he went on them with the blades, or if it's because he's pushing down mid on Ascent with an operator to get all up in the opponent's face. Vision Strikers are in the same group as Ascend, and when I imagine the Buzz and the CNED way of playing Jet and how they might come up against each other, it makes me very intrigued to see how that would go. So players who I really think are worth looking out for. From F4Q, Bunny and Zumba are definitely my go-to for good plays. Bunny is this aggressive, gung-ho race, basically everything that she is designed to be. He has a real big taste for shotguns, even on full buy rounds, and he's not afraid to get in people's faces. Meanwhile, Zumba is who you're likely to see on Astra. It's a very supportive role, but he's the one who can show up to a fight on site late and get 2 to 4 kills and totally swing the momentum of the round. He's oftentimes also going to be their lurker, and he's actually very effective at doing so as well. I'll be keeping an eye on Esperanza and 5k. Esperanza partly because he's new, but also because I want to see how he fares on Sova going forward. He has had some really nutty Hunter's Furies where he can just bring 2 to 3 people down from a great position, but there are also some times where he uses a recon dart at times where I would have preferred to see an owl drone or even a trailblazer, for example in showers on Bind at the very beginning of an attacking round. For 5k, as I say, he's generally their Reyna player. If they're going to put him on Sky again, I want to see some improvement in the way that the utility gets used so that it's more effective. I also want to see him I don't know, be more effective on the Reyna on certain maps. When we saw their map on Split, he seemed really good. He was getting in these opening engagements quite a lot. He was doing his job. But on Icebox, I just felt like he was playing a little bit more passively than some other Reyna players that we've seen in other regions do. You know, if I'm seeing someone like Tens or Scream playing Reyna on Icebox, they are probably gonna be going like all in, really aggressive, and that's not something we saw from 5K when he played on Icebox against Vision Strikers. From Vision Strikers, Buzz and Marco are really going to show up for sure. Buzz almost exclusively plays Jett, and he has a very proactive, very energetic way of playing her, and it's great to see how he gets supported too. He's almost never left on his own. And then when you look at Marco, he's more of a supportive player. He's either going to be playing an Astra or a Viper. It really depends on the map. But he's very good at that role, and he's an excellent lurker as well. And he's a very, very important part of the team for them keeping control of certain parts of the map. Keeping an eye on would have to be Stax and RB. Stax is the IGL of the team, and in a lot of cases you can really see how his thought processes are playing out, and I really enjoy seeing the cogs whirring when you're watching an IGL. For example, when they were playing on Bind on defense, the way he would defensively position himself over at B with two other players, it showed that he'd really read into F4Q's preference for pressuring into hookah, for example. But I think some of his utility usage had some question marks over. I'm thinking on Split when he ended up rolling Thundering all of his team, and I'm pretty sure F4Q managed to take the round after that. It was unfortunate. As for RB, this is one of the more flexible players in the team, but I mean, also in the server, I guess. We saw him play on Sage, Raze, and Sova throughout the course of the grand finals against F4Q, and he can play really gutsy at times. We got to see that on Bind, the way he played this Cosmic Divide, but also he's a very good supportive player. He'll always play alongside another player. He's good at flanking with other players. He's a great chaperone, and he's part of the reason that the team has such good trade potential. So those are my thoughts on the Korean teams going into Masters Berlin. I'm really excited to see how they're going to do, actually, you know, especially with Vision Strikers. People really thought that they were going to be the team to make it to Masters Reykjavik, and they did not. So now we finally get to see how they're going to fare on the main stage, as well as F4Q, who have kind of just come up and taken the scene by storm. Seeing how they're going to fare against the playstyles of other regions is certainly going to be an interesting one, because there are some stark differences compared to some of the other regions, and I guess we're yet to see how that's going to do. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys didn't see, I'm actually going to be at Masters Berlin working the event. I am so fucking stoked for it, and this video, I'm gonna say it counts as part of my prep, so I'm not procrastinating, I'm working. Let me know what you guys think of the Korean teams, how you think they're going to do, what you think of their groups. What region do you think is going to be the biggest threat to the Korean region as well? Because that's an interesting one. Are there any other teams at Masters Berlin that you are particularly excited to see? Let me know in the comments. We'll have a whole discussion about it. Hopefully I'll be able to make a bit more content before I go. But it is a week today before I fly, and I got a lot to do. So we'll see about that. But thank you guys so much for watching the video, and I will see you soon. Goodbye.